Imagine yourself wandering through a medieval village as twilight settles gently over thatched rooftops and cobbled streets. The air is tinged with the warm scent of wood smoke and livestock, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls slowly, rhythmically, marking the end of the day. You move past the homes of peasants, their small plots of land fenced with crooked timber, and continue onward toward grander stone manors, perhaps even the distant silhouette of a castle on a hill. In this quiet hour, there is a peculiar stillness, a timelessness that allows you to step back not just into the Middle Ages, but into the very fabric of its social world. Tonight, we will drift gently through the layers of wealth and poverty in medieval society. From the humblest serf, scratching out a living in the fields, to the opulent life of a monarch cloaked in velvet and surrounded by gold, you'll observe, from a soft and soothing distance, how wealth shaped the lives, homes, meals, and daily rhythms of people in a world long past. Let's begin, not with kings or merchants, but with those whose lives were closest to the soiled peasants, who made up the vast and quiet majority. You begin your journey at the edge of the village, where the earth is dark and damp beneath your feet. Here lives the medieval serf, often bound to the land of a lord, his life as rooted as the barley he plants in spring. His home is a simple wattle and daub hut, its walls patched with clay and straw, its roof sloped and thatched, and its single room often shared with animals for warmth. Inside, the air is thick with the mingling scents of smoke, sweat, and boiled grains. A fire smoulders low in the hearth, its smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, and the floor is hard-packed earth. There are no windows, only a narrow opening covered by a wooden shutter. The only furniture is a rough bench, a stool, a single straw mattress for the entire family suggests a life lived in function, not comfort. Serfs did not own the land they worked. Instead, they tilled it for a feudal lord in exchange for protection and the right to cultivate a small strip for their own subsistence. Days began with the rising sun and ended when the fields were swallowed in dusk. Their diet was meagre coarse bread made from rye or barley, pottage thick with beans or cabbage, and if they were lucky, a piece of salted pork saved for feast days. Their clothes were made of undyed wool, rough and itchy, often passed down through family members. Shoes, if they had them at all, were simple leather turn shoes, stitched by hand and worn until they split. A woolen cap might keep their heads warm, but the chill still clung to their bones in winter. The rhythm of a serf's life was dictated by necessity. There was little room for dreams or ambition, and yet, within their quiet lives, lay deep roots of tradition. They marked time not by hours, but by the changing of seasons, the planting, the harvest, the lean days of late winter. Even lower than the serf were the landless laboursmen and women without ties to land or lord, drifting from village to village, hoping for work during planting or harvest season. They slept in barns or under the open sky, sometimes relying on charity, sometimes on luck. With no land, no permanent home, and no guarantee of work, their existence was the most precarious of all. Yet even they formed part of the medieval tapestry and undercurrent of survival that carried on quietly, year after year. For the lowest classes, money was rarely held in the hand. Wealth, when it came, was measured in chickens, in a good harvest, in the ability to endure another winter without starving. And still, amid the hardship, there were moments of joy, a feast day with music and laughter, a child's birth, or the communal warmth of working side by side during the harvest. As you leave behind the dirt paths and the faint sound of distant ploughs, you begin to ascend not just in elevation, but in class. The next layer of medieval life awaits, those villagers and freemen who lived just above the serf, in modest but independent lives. Now, as the village lane turns and rises slightly, you come upon sturdier homes. Their walls are timber-framed, with whitewashed plaster panels and roofs more neatly thatched, or even tiled with wooden shingles. These are the dwellings of freemen and craftsmen individuals who stood just above serfs in the social hierarchy, often holding their land in exchange for rent, not service, and practicing trades passed down through generations. Inside a freeman's home, you notice more definition to the space. A small separate area for sleeping, perhaps with a modest partition of woven reeds or cloth. A wooden table and bench, sometimes with a chest for storage. A pot suspended over a fire pit glows gently in the hearth, and herbs hang drying from the rafters. The smell is slightly sweeter herestewed leeks, onions, and dried herbs wafting gently in the air. The freeman, unlike the serf, has choices. He may rent land from the lord, but can also sell his produce, hire labourers, or save coin. He can move, though the world beyond the manor is still fraught with risk. His clothing is coarser than a noble's, but better than a serf's dyed wool tunics, in natural colours like browns and soft blues, perhaps edged with simple embroidery if his wife is skilled with the needle. Craftsmen, in particular, held a special place in medieval society. The blacksmith's forge crackled day and night, its coals glowing like a second sun. There, iron was shaped into horseshoes, nails and tools, essential for both peasant and lord alike. The carpenter's tools lay in neat rows, and his fingers bore the calluses of work, yet his skill brought respect. Tailors, cobblers, coopersall formed the working backbone of towns and villages. Some craftspeople belonged to guilds, especially in towns, where trade was better organized and regulated. These guilds ensured quality, set prices, and protected their members' rights. A master might train apprentices. Young boys who lived in his home learned the trade over years, and eventually became journeymen in search of mastery and independence. You might imagine a day in their lives beginning with the sound of roosters, followed by a light meal of bread and cheese before opening shop or heading to the field. The work was steady, and often seasonal farmers followed the planting calendar, while craftsmen adapted to market demands. The freeman's family, including his wife and children, contributed to the household's productivity. A woman might weave or tend a small garden, while children fetched water or learned the trade. Meals were simple but nourishing. Bread remained a staple, but better grains like wheat became more common here. A bit of ale might be brewed at home, and perhaps some eggs or smoked fish. On feast days or when trade was good, a chicken or rabbit might grace the table. Still modest, but compared to the serf's diet, these small luxuries marked a meaningful step upward. You also sense a growing connection to money in this layer. Freemen might pay taxes or tolls, hire help, or trade in markets. Coins likely, silver pennies were handled more often, even if sparingly. With access to market towns and fairs, these villagers lived in a space that blended subsistence with aspiration. Homes were passed down or expanded, and there was pride in ownership. Small carved beams, a shuttered window, a painted door, modest, yet dignified. And while they still bowed before their lords, there was more autonomy here. They voted in local assemblies, joined church guilds, and occasionally travelled to nearby towns to trade or attend mass. As you gently rise through the hierarchy, you begin to leave behind the rustic echoes of rural life. Ahead lies the bustling world of townsfolk, and merchants, those whose lives revolved not around soil or seasons, but around markets, trade routes, and coin. Now the road underfoot changes. The packed dirt gives way to uneven cobblestones, and the scent in the air shiftless of livestock and open hearths, more of spice, leather, and distant sea salt. You've reached the town, where the rhythm of life beats to the pulse of commerce. Here dwell the merchants, men and women who live not by the harvest of fields, but by the turning of goods, the rise and fall of demand, and the shimmer of silver coins exchanged in crowded markets. The homes are taller here, narrow but rising 2 or 3 stories above the street, with jettied upper floors casting long shadows below. At the ground level, the front of the house opens into a shop or stall, where bolts of cloth, loaves of bread, pots of honey, or barrels of wine might be displayed. Behind the shop lies the living space, and above, sleeping quarters accessible by creaking wooden stairs. A merchant's home is a place of both labour and leisure, often bustling with apprentices, servants, and family alike. These merchants range from modest shopkeepers to wealthy traders who fund caravans or ships. A wool merchant might source raw fleece from the countryside, have it spun and dyed locally, and sell the finished cloth at seasonal fairs. A spice trader could have contacts reaching all the way to Italy or the Levant, their wares carrying the distant warmth of cinnamon, cloves, or pepper. The baker and brewer, though tied to food, are also merchants providing daily necessities in exchange for coin. Unlike the peasant or freeman, the merchant's world is full of transaction and risk. Success depends not just on hard work, but on timing, negotiation, and relationships. They must understand weight and measure, the flow of goods through towns, the taxes and tolls imposed by lords or kings, and the preferences of their customers. Written records become more common in this world: ledgers, inventories, IOUs scratched onto parchment and sealed with wax. Their clothing reflects their rising station: tunics of finer wool, dyed in richer hues crimson, deep blue, and forest green, belts with bronze fittings, soft leather shoes, and sometimes a cloak lined with fur in colder seasons. A merchant's wife might wear a linen underdress and a long outer gown, her wimple or veil carefully arranged, respectable, modest, yet unmistakably above the commoner. Food, too, takes on new dimension. Bread made with finer flour, a wider array of herbs and spices, meat and fish served more frequently, and ale of higher quality, sometimes imported wine, if wealth permits. Meals are taken in courses, and tableware begins to include pewter, or even imported ceramics. In the marketplace, one can feel the hum of negotiation, the clink of scales, the creak of carts. Town criers call out news and prices, while vendors hawk their goods from booths draped in cloth. Above it all, the merchant class grows cautious yet ambitious, respected but not yet noble. Some merchants rise higher still. They gain wealth enough to fund civic projects, earn honorary titles, or marry into lesser nobility. Guilds become their anchor, offering support, regulation, and influence. A successful merchant might serve as mayor, fund a church window, or endow a local hospital. Yet their path is still vulnerable. A bad harvest, a political shift, or an ill-fated voyage could ruin a merchant overnight. Wealth in this class is more fluid than in landed nobility. It comes and goes with the winds of trade, and each new venture carries risk. And so, the merchant lives with one foot in the world of opportunity, and one in the shadow of uncertainty. Still, for many, it is a world preferable to ploughing fields or serving lords. They value independence, mobility, and the power that comes with coin. As towns grow and trade flourishes, this class becomes increasingly central to medieval life, shaping not just markets but politics and culture. From this world of shops and shipping manifests, we now move higher still, toward those whose status is tied not to coin, but to land and lineage. The nobility, whose castles loom above both town and countryside, await your arrival. You leave the town behind now, its market square slowly fading into silence as you ascend a winding path, lined with hedgerows and watchful trees. Ahead, rising against the sky, stands a stone fortress grey, angular and commanding. This is the world of the nobility, a realm where wealth is measured not in coin alone, but in acres, allegiance, and ancestry. The noble estate, or manor, is a world unto itself. At its heart stands the lord's hall or castle, constructed of stone and surrounded by walls, towers, and perhaps even a moat. Within those walls lies not only the lord's household, but his authority. His wealth is land, and with that land comes power, the right to collect rents, command soldiers, and hold courts. A noble might own multiple manors, each worked by dozens of families, all owing labour or payment in kind. The daily life of a noble is defined less by labor and more by governance and ritual. Early mornings begin with prayers, followed by correspondence, meetings with stewards or vassals, the settling of disputes, or the inspection of estates. Afternoons might include training in martial skills, overseeing the household accounts, or entertaining visiting guests. Evenings often culminate in long ceremonial meals taken in the great hallen echoing space lined with tapestries, warmed by massive hearths, and filled with the clatter of serving vessels and the low hum of conversation. Their clothing is rich in fabric and deep in symbolism. The lord might wear a tunic of velvet or fine wool, dyed in royal hues like crimson or deep indigo, fastened with ornate buttons or a decorative belt. His cloak is trimmed with fur, perhaps fox or ermined. A gold or silver brooch may gleam at his shoulder. The lady of the manor is equally splendid, her gown flowing and layered, the fabrics embroidered or beaded, her hair braided and netted in silk, her fingers adorned with rings bearing crests or stones. Meals here are theatrical. Bread is served in trenchers-thick slabs, often used as plates, while meats are roasted over open flames and presented with sauces flavored with imported spices. Fish, fowl, game, and pastries fill the long trestle tables. Servants bring course after course, and goblets are filled with ale or imported wine. While the food is plentiful, manners and presentation are just as important. The noble class is keenly aware of hierarchy, and the seating arrangement alone reveals a map of social rank. Yet, nobility does not equate to ease. Managing a vast estate requires diligence. Harvests must be recorded, taxes collected, buildings maintained, and legal disputes arbitrated. A negligent lord could quickly fall from favour or fortune if his lands grew unproductive or his vassals turned disloyal. Education, too, is prized here, especially for sons destined to inherit. Young noblemen learn Latin, arithmetic, the art of war, and the traditions of courtly behaviour. Daughters are trained in estate management, languages, music, and the roles expected of them in marriage, often arranged for alliance and land, not affection. Beyond the estate, nobles are bound to the king or queen, often serving as military commanders, royal advisors, or courtiers. They participate in tournaments, attend feasts, and present themselves at royal courts, where power is both visible and ephemeral. They are expected to uphold chivalric ideals, loyalty, honour, and martial prowess, though reality often strayed from ideal. Religion, too, plays a significant role in noble life. Patronage of abbeys, donations to churches, and the construction of chapels served both spiritual and social purposes. A noble family's piety, when publicly displayed, reinforced their authority and offered protection for their souls. While the noble lifestyle appears enviable in its richness, it is bound tightly by duty, expectation, and lineage. A noble who fails in war, mismanages wealth, or falls afoul of politics may lose not only his lands, but his legacy. And so, behind the grandeur lies a constant vigilancia, quiet tension beneath the silks and steel. And now, from the lives of these land-owning lords and ladies, we rise still further, not by stepping into a new village or estate, but into a sphere where earthly power converges with divine mandate. Ahead lies the world of the monarch, the sovereign who reigns over all classes, bearing the crown that both inspires awe and burdens the soul. The air feels different now, quieter, more distant as you approach the royal court. No longer a simple village or a fortified manor, but a sprawling palace or towering castle, where turrets rise into the sky and banners flutter on high walls. Here resides the king or queen, at the apex of medieval society. Their wealth is vast, yet often elusive, woven into taxes, territories, tributes, and symbolic authority rather than simple piles of gold. The royal residence is a maze of chambers, chapels, and galleries, each carefully maintained by an army of servants, stewards, guards, and courtiers. Outside, drawbridges and gates protect the seat of rule. Inside, stone halls echo with the soft shuffle of footsteps on tiled floors and the low murmurs of political conversation. The scent of beeswax polish, fresh rushes, and warm bread fills the great hall where the monarch receives guests. Unlike the nobility, whose fortunes are tied to individual estates, a monarch's wealth spans an entire realm. It flows in from feudal dues, royal taxes, fines, land rents, and foreign alliances. Some of it is physical gold stored in coffers, jeweled crowns locked in treasuries, but much is ceremonial, wrapped in layers of law and tradition. The king does not own all things, but all things are his by right. His garments reflect that symbolism. A royal robe might be edged in ermine, heavy with embroidery in gold thread. A crown is reserved for ceremony, but other signs of royalty are always present. The signet ring, the embroidered crest, the presence of armed retainers. His queen, if there is one, wears a circlet or diadem and gowns of layered silk and velvet, often imported from abroad at great expense. Every element of appearance, from their posture to their polish, is deliberate, each movement an extension of their role. The royal court is not merely a place, it is an organism. Courtiers and nobles arrive daily, offering gifts, requesting favours, whispering alliances, or seeking positions. Pages and squires rush about with messages. Musicians play softly in the background. Foreign envoys wait with gifts, perhaps rare fabrics, strange animals, or coins from distant realms. Banquets here are beyond grand. Roasted swan, candied fruit, spiced wine, elaborately shaped pastries. Food is no longer just sustenance but a display of status. The monarch presides over a kingdom of both stability and fragility. They must balance competing noble interests, manage the treasury, fund wars, maintain alliances, and navigate the powerful influence of the church. Their authority is often portrayed as divine by the grace of God, yet rebellion, assassination, or political failure always loom nearby. Royal life is not one of rest but of constant visibility. Even sleep is taken lightly, often behind heavy curtains, guarded by loyal men, and never far from the weight of decision-making. Their children are not raised in softness. Princes are trained in diplomacy, warfare, and courtly manners, while princesses are groomed for strategic marriages, their futures already woven into treaties yet to be signed. Education for royal offspring often includes private tutors in multiple languages, theology, law, and the arts of statecraft. They are rarely alone, always surrounded by attendants, watched and prepared for lives not of choosing, but of obligation. While the monarch's material wealth appears unmatched, it is never truly their own. Castles may be lavish, but many are cold, draughty, and inherited rather than chosen. Jewels may glitter on the crown, but they often serve as collateral for loans in times of war. A feast may dazzle the eye, but it might come at the cost of another region's tax burden. Despite this, the monarch lives with a degree of separation few can imagine. They are addressed in titles, viewed from a distance, and mythologized in songs and sermons. Theirs is a life of ceremonion, where gestures are choreographed, clothing is symbolic, and every appearance is political. And yet, even here, in the highest stratum, there are limits. The king may rule, but he depends on the loyalty of lords. The queen may preside, but she must navigate both court politics and personal influence. The crown is not only an emblem of power, but a weight borne constantly. Leaving the royal court behind, we descend not downward, but sideways into another form of medieval wealth, not of land or birth, but of faith. The church awaits you now, in cloisters and cathedrals where spiritual riches often rivaled temporal ones, and where power took a more sacred, yet no less worldly form. The path now grows quieter, as stone buildings give way to soaring arches, and the clang of sword and coin is replaced by the faint echo of chanted prayer. You enter the world of the medieval church realm, where wealth flowed not from inheritance or trade, but from faith, fear, and the ceaseless rhythm of devotion. Its centre abbeys, monasteries, cathedrals stood as beacons of order and permanence in a world often shaken by change. The cathedral rises before you, its walls carved with saints and kings, its towers stretching toward the heavens. Inside, cool air clings to the stone columns. Stained glass windows shimmer with colour, casting halos of ruby, sapphire, and emerald light across the flagstones. The scent of incense lingers, and candle flames flicker in reverent stillness. This is the church's wealth, made visible measured not only in gold, but in grandeur. Yet behind the beauty lies complexity. The church in medieval times was immensely powerful, owning vast tracts of land and collecting tithes mandatory offerings amounting to 1/10 of a peasant's harvest or earnings. Through these, it grew not just spiritually influential, but materially rich. Bishops and abbots managed lands rivaling those of secular lords. Monasteries operated as self-sufficient estates with their own labourers, mills, breweries, and even hospitals. The monks who lived within those cloisters followed rules of silence, prayer, and labour. They wore robes of undyed wool plain, modest and symbolic of humility. Yet the abbey's treasuries might contain illuminated manuscripts, gilded reliquaries, and precious vessels used only on holy days. Wealth was cloaked in piety, but it was still wealth built on centuries of donation, bequest, and accumulation. Higher clergy bishops, cardinals, and influential abbots often lived in considerable comfort. Their residences were well appointed, with private gardens, libraries, and servants. Their meals were more restrained than a noble's, but still elegant. Fresh fish, fine bread, wine from church vineyards, and fruits grown in monastery orchards. Their garments, though ecclesiastical, might be trimmed with fine linen or decorated with embroidery indicating their rank. Clerics wielded influence beyond their pulpits. The church advised kings, negotiated treaties, and kept records of births, marriages, and deaths. It educated the sons of nobles, and sometimes merchants, shaping the minds of future leaders. Many kings could not rule without ecclesiastical support, and excommunication, the church's power to sever someone from the sacraments, could ruin reputations and spark revolts. But not all within the church were born to high station. Parish priests often lived humbly, close to the villagers they served. Their homes were small, their incomes modest, and their duties many. They baptized infants, tended the sick, buried the dead, and offered mass, all while navigating the expectations of both their flock and their bishops. Meanwhile, mendicant orders like the Franciscans and Dominicans chose poverty deliberately, walking barefoot, owning nothing, and living by charity alone. Their wealth lay in spiritual authority, and the respect of communities who saw them as models of pious life, far removed from the grandeur of bishops or the wealth of monasteries. Still, the church's place in medieval wealth was unique. It did not merely hold land or goods, it held souls. Cathedrals were funded by donations made in hopes of salvation. Monasteries were endowed by nobles seeking prayers for their ancestors. Wealth flowed to the church because it promised what no merchant or monarch could: eternal life. That promise shaped every layer of society. Serfs tithed despite hunger. Lords funded chapels. Kings founded abbeys. Even merchants left coin for masses to be said for their souls. And so, the church's coffers grew, its barns full, its treasuries deep, its voice carrying both in this world and the next. As you step outside the cathedral into the twilight, the bells begin to ring again, their tones rich and slow, calling monks to prayer. The sacred fades gently behind you as the next chapter begins, sown less exalted, yet no less vital. You're about to enter the lives of those who lived on the fringes of wealth, the wandering poor, the beggars, and the outcast. Their stories, quieter and often overlooked, reveal a different kind of endurance. The cobbled streets narrow now, winding between uneven rows of buildings where the timber leans tiredly under the weight of time. You find yourself not in the bustling heart of town, nor beneath the vaulted ceilings of cathedral or castle, but in a place where daily life teeters on the edge of survival. Here live the poor, the transient, the outcast, those for whom wealth is an abstract notion, glimpsed but never held. Their dwellings, if they have any, are crude and cramped, often a single room shared by several people, with straw mattresses on the floor, and scarcely more than a wooden bowl and a single pot to their name. The walls may be patched with rags or mud, and the roof repaired with whatever could be scavenged. In the cold months, warmth comes from huddling together, or from the chance kindness of a neighbour. Some of these individuals once had more. Widows of craftsmen, aging labourers, or children orphaned by plague might find themselves here on the fringes, dependent on charity, seasonal work, or the unpredictable rhythms of the alms bowl. Others have always lived close to destitution, born to landless labourers or itinerant workers who never settled long enough to sow roots. Food is a daily concern. A crust of bread from a bakery's refuse pile, a bowl of thin gruel from a monastery's soup kitchen, wild greens picked from the edge of a pasture each meal is uncertain. Hunger sharpens the senses, and the days are often spent seeking enough to last until the next. There are no markets for the poor, only the hope of leftovers, broken goods, or pity. Clothing, too, reflects their status. Torn tunics, patched cloaks, sandals fashioned from rope or wood, everything is second-hand, often third or fourth. A child may wear an adult's cut-down garment, sleeves dragging and hems tied in knots. Yet even here, people adapt. Rags are mended, feet are wrapped in cloth, hair is tied back with twine. In this resourcefulness lies a quiet dignity. Many among the poor live by casual labour. A strong back might earn a few coins helping with harvest or carrying loads at the docks. Others sing ballads for coin, mend pots, or sell kindling door to door. Some beg outright, kneeling at church doors or public fountains, invoking saints and sorrows. The infirm or elderly may depend entirely on these meagre acts of mercy. Illness is a constant shadow. With little access to physicians or clean water, ailments linger. Fevers spread swiftly in crowded quarters, and wounds go untreated. The sick may be shunned for fear of contagion, or left to the care of charitable religious orders. Monasteries sometimes offer beds in their infirmaries, but space is limited, and priorities lie elsewhere. And yet, even here, amid the uncertainty, community exists. Poor neighbours share what little they have. They gather around street fires, swap stories, and help one another bury their dead. Festivals and saints' days offer rare moments of joy, opportunities to sing, to watch processions, to remember that even the lowliest are part of the human story. In the eyes of the Church, poverty is often spiritualized. Christ, after all, was poor. Beggars were seen as holy reminders of humility. Giving alms became a way for the rich to earn heavenly merit, and many religious orders were built on the ideals of poverty and service. Still, this reverence rarely translated into systemic change. The poor remained where they were visible but uncounted, necessary but uncelebrated. Some, labelled as vagabonds or idlers, were treated harshly. Towns passed ordinances to control them, forbidding begging without a license or exiling those deemed unworthy. Women in particular faced suspicion, if unmarried and unprotected, often finding themselves doubly marginalized. Children of the poor were put to work early tending animals, fetching water, or simply surviving. Few learned to read, and their futures were shaped not by promise but by proximity to work, food, or favor. Many perished young. Those who lived long enough became the next generation of laborers, beggars, or, if fortune turned kindly, servants or apprentices. And yet, in these forgotten corners of the medieval world, resilience flowered. There were lullabies sung in soft voices, games played with sticks and stones, and small acts of kindness passed from hand to hand. The poor may have lacked coin or comfort, but they possessed one another, and in that, a measure of wealth unrecorded in any ledger. Now, from these shadows of poverty, you'll turn your gaze upward again, not into the heights of royal halls or sacred sanctuaries, but into the subtle layers in between. There remains yet another class, the quietly wealthy, the emerging bourgeoisie, those whose power grew not from old titles, but from ambition, skill, and an ever-widening world. As dawn breaks over the rooftops of a growing medieval town, the chimneys begin to smoke and shutters open onto busy lanes. Here, you encounter a different kind of wealth-own, less ancient than that of lords and more agile than that of monarchs. This is the world of the bourgeoisie, a class quietly rising between nobility and peasantry, shaped by trade, learning, and a changing economy. Their homes stand tall and narrow, with carved wooden facades and glass panes in the upper window small, luxuries signalling comfort without opulence. Unlike nobles who inherit their wealth, the bourgeoisie have earned theirs through persistence, calculation, and time. They are merchants, lawyers, physicians, financiers, and master artisan urban dwellers whose wealth is built within walls, not fields. Inside these homes you find a blend of refinement and practicality. Walls are hung with painted cloths to keep the cold at bay, floors swept and scattered with rushes. There may be bookshand copied and rarer a psalter resting beneath an icon. Furniture is solid, often carved oak, a chest for linens, a trestle table for meals, and a chair with armstill a status symbol. The dining area, while modest compared to a noble hall, may feature pewter dishes, ceramic jugs, and a tablecloth of linen. This class eats well. Bread is white and soft, made from sifted flour. Meals include roasted poultry, preserved meats, cheese, and seasonal fruits. Spices, though expensive, are used sparingly to impress guest. Nutmeg, cinnamon, saffron. A glass of wine might accompany supper, or a strong ale brewed from barley and hops. Clothing is carefully chosen, not for vanity, but for respectability. Men wear tunics of dyed wool, trimmed with fur or lined in linen. Their cloaks fall in neat folds, and their boots shine from frequent oiling. Women's gowns are layered, sometimes with a girdle hung with keys, a sign of household authority. Their hoods are neatly pinned, their sleeves tailored. No one here wishes to mimic a noble exactly, but appearances must reflect success and order. What sets this class apart is their access to knowledge. Many are literate, and their children are taught reading, writing, and arithmetic skills essential for managing books, contracts, and correspondence. Some boys attend cathedral schools, and a few continue on to university, where law, medicine, and theology await. Education is not yet widespread, but here it is seen as a worthy investment. The bourgeoisie also benefit from connections local and far-flung. A cloth merchant might have agents in Flanders or Florence, exchanging letters sealed with wax and penned in careful Latin. A banker may lend to lords, securing land as collateral. A notary might record wills, marriages, and business disputes, his services crucial to the flow of urban life. Their wealth is mobile, adaptable. They invest in property, lend money, and fund civic projects in exchange for influence. They also hold civic roles. As towns gain charters, local councils emerged, often dominated by this class. A respected burgess could become mayor, tax collector, or magistrate. Through guilds and councils, they shaped urban policy, regulated trade, and defended their interests against both noble demands and royal decrees. But their position is not without tension. Nobles may disdain them, fearing the erosion of old privileges. Peasants may mistrust them, seeing their coin but not their toil. Even within the church, their rise provokes unease. How could wealth gained from wool or wax compare to the blessings of noble blood or spiritual devotion? Still, the bourgeoisie grow. They sponsor chapels, commission altarpieces, fund bridges and hospitals. Their names appear in public records and private ledgers, carved on tombstones in family chapels. They dream not only of comfort, but of legacy. In time, their sons may marry into noble families. Their daughters may bring rich dowries to lesser lords. Slowly, imperceptibly, they reshape the fabric of medieval society. From this emerging middle class, a new era begins to styrone where trade routes lengthen, cities expand, and the bonds of feudalism begin to loosen. But that world lies ahead. For now, you look back down the long ladder of medieval wealth, from kings to craftsmen, from monks to mendicants, and reflect on the intricate layers of a society where every rank shaped the lives above and below it. And with that, your journey through medieval wealth draws near its end. In the gentle hush that follows, we return, one last time, to the quiet of reflectioner, closing that invites rest as surely as it invites understanding.